Well, hello, folks. Today is episode 14 of the Prideability show, and I'm so glad to be here today. And I'm sorry that I haven't been on for a while. And we are really working on, really getting the show off. And Vermont Pride is doing some wonderful advertising, trying to get more interviewers. And today's guest, we got a guest coming today. I hope he comes. His name is Christopher Woods. He's a huge activist in the disability movement and for people with disabilities that are Lgbtqia. And we've got a brand new outlook for this show. We're going to be getting a brand new banner to really critique this show, and I'm so excited, and you should be too. So a little bit of announcements that Vermont Pride Center wants me to share is there's an LGBTQ community health needs assessment, and please take the survey at the link below to help let Pride Center know more about the health needs of Vermont LGBTQ communities. Also, they've got town meetings going on. They've got one in Montpelier, one in St. Johnsbury, one in Brattleboro, one in Bennington and Burlington and Rutland. Wow. And, Pride Center does so much for people in the community, and they're a nonprofit organization. And, if you'd like to, and, if you have some spare change or, some money, just send it to Vermont Pride. They would love to just get a little bit of money if you got it, and because they've got really good programs, and prevention for AIDS and AIDS testing and GLAM and trans meetings and people with disabilities meetings every Wednesday from 4:30 to 5:30, I think, or 4 to 5. And so they're a great organization, and if they weren't around, I wouldn't be here having these shows. And I really feel strong about this movement for people with disabilities that are Lgbtqia, and to have that space for them to go and just vent and be themselves. And I think that's so important. And so, I just got to say, thank you for the Pride Center for their work and having that space for them. And we're going to be some interviewers. I had talked to Mike Bensel about talking to the board members, and so we might have some board members because I don't think they really know much about the disability movement and what we're doing in this spectacular show. So I just wanted to say, thank you so much for viewing and sticking in there all the time when I come and do a show, because that's important. That's important to me, to have my viewers to say, well, it's funny when I go to work and somebody will say, I miss your show, David. I haven't seen you in a while. And I'll just say, well, I haven't been doing a show, and we haven't had people to interview, but we're really working on that, trying to get more interviewers, and working around state of Vermont and trying to get more of these groups going. I think that's what we need. And I'm a huge activist for people with disabilities, Lgbtqia, and I'm also working on a project through the council, and it's called storytelling. And that is going to be a private story about my life when I was growing up and being in a day program and feeling what I felt when I was in that day program. And it's going to be a spectacular, spectacular story. And so I'm working on the story right now, and I want to go back to the school, and I want to try to get into the classroom that I was in and just feel that surrounding area. I mean, I'm 53 years old now, and when I went to that school and it was segregated for just people with disabilities, and how it made me feel, and the teachers were, I'm not saying all of them, but there was a majority of them that were very abusive to kids back in the early 70s, and being strapped into a chair, and you just can't do that today because there's so many laws that you can't do that to people. And there was this teacher that was so abusive, and I'm not going to say names because, I just don't want to get out there, but we need to keep this movement going, and we need to stop these segregated schools to just have people with disabilities, and we need to say, they need to be mainstream with regular students. So, I'm all about the movement for people with disabilities, and I'm gonna really, really fight this with legislators, and because it's important to me. It's important to me to not move backwards in time, but to move forward. And it's important to me. And when I heard Sue Aronoff was telling me the other night at this storytelling workshop, she said, David, there are schools still in Vermont that are segregating people with special needs and special ed for people with disabilities. And it's so wrong, and we really, really, really need to tell our legislators this is wrong, and they need to be mainstreamed with different students. And I tell you, when I was back in that environment when I was little, I felt so belittled, little, and like it wasn't meant for me, and I didn't want to be there, but it was the only choice that I had. And I got to tell you, my story is going to be really emotional. It's going to be all about my childhood, and it's going to be a great story. And so the next time when we do Prideability, and I have some time to talk to you folks, I'll tell you more about the storytelling story. So thank you so much for coming on today and just listening to me. And if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be here having a show. So thank you. And we're going to be waiting for our next guest. His name is Christopher Woods, and so he'll be here, and we'll talk to him. I hope he comes today, but we're having some bad weather out there. So anyhow, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the future. Hey folks, how are you today? And this is episode 14, and now we got a really great guest speaker. His name Christopher Woods, and he tell us where you came from and the work that you've been doing for people with disabilities that are GLBTQIA, and just want to get to know you.
Okay, well, I'm originally from Kentucky. I went to school there, and that's when I first started working with people with disabilities, really, at a place called the Wendell Foster Center, where the Wendell Foster Center was a place where they sent people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it was very interesting having to, some of the interactions there were very interesting because there were people who were sometimes the victims of abuse. And so being upset with any of them was an interesting thing because their first response was to touch. And developing relationships with people and helping them to figure out that that's not like their function, that's not how they apologize, was really kind of important to me. But then I went away to school at the American University in Washington, D.C., where I continued to work with lots of marginalized populations, including doing a Border Babies program with HIV-positive babies down in this Greater Southeast Community Hospital. And it's where I also did my first stuff with ACT UP. So that was pretty intense. Also Meals on Wheels. So HIV was a really big part of the work that I did continuing through life. I was the executive director for an AIDS task force for almost 10 years. And it was very interesting when I would do that work around education because I'm from Kentucky, so it's like the buckle of the Bible Belt. So the first thing that I would do is I'd ask the audience, "Hey, who do you think are the people who get HIV?" And they would all look at me and be like, "Oh, I'm not saying that out loud." So I would write on the board in foot-tall letters, blacks, junkies, and fags, and then turn around and just stare at them. And then I would say, "Okay, well, now let's talk about who it really is." But it was really interesting because none of them were willing to say anything like that because they were like, "Well, that's who we think it is. It's you," and so that's been it. So using the intersections of my identity and doing work has been really important to me. So.
And what do you do here in the state of Vermont now?
Oh, I'm the executive director for Vermont Psychiatric Survivors. We do advocacy and patient representation and we do advocacy in Montpelier at the State House. So I testify in front of lots of committees. We do also within psychiatric facilities, we help people to advocate for their rights and also help them to bridge out of those services.
So do you see a lot of people with disabilities that have difficult in mental health and?
Well, considering the suicide rate for people who are LGBTQIA, yes, but there's another layer. There are layers of additional problems that happen when you are not a cisgendered white male. When you're in a psychiatric facility, those other identities sometimes feel like they've been weaponized, so that you are seen if you are seen by some as less than human, then I don't know what's less than human, but you're seen as that, and often your issues, people tell you, are the result of your lifestyle choices or your this or that. And I'll give you an example. I was working with someone back home in Kentucky, who shall remain nameless, and he wanted to do he was 21. I just told him he was HIV positive. His parents decided to kick him out into the street, and so she's this little white gay kid who's in the hospital, and the psych nurse said to him, well, because he checked in because he's like, I'm feeling a little unsafe. I'm feeling, I don't know what to do. And the psych nurse said to him, well, don't you think that your position now is a result of all your lifestyle choices? Which didn't sit well with me. I basically told him to put on your clothes and we're leaving. And the next day I went and I saw the CEO of the hospital, and that psych nurse no longer works there. Because that is not anything that you ever say to anyone.
No.
In that position, regardless of what their lifestyle choices are.
Right.
You're not there to judge. Also, I did HIV work, but when I went to grad school, which is how I came to Vermont, at SIT, I landed on a practicum in South Africa, where I worked for Gender Dynamics, which is the first transgender organization on the continent. I worked with their founder and executive director for about a year.
Wow.
So what I did there was the most interesting thing I'd say I did there was training police on what to do when you encounter someone who is transgender. Because the result of being arrested wasn't always fun. Being arrested is never fun, but they could be extremely traumatizing, physically hurtful. Because and then what we did there was we didn't train beat cops, because training beat cops doesn't work. Because they don't have the power to change anything else other than their own behavior. So what we did was Provincial Commanders, which is the equivalent of your state, of the highest individual law enforcement in a state. And then all of their training directors and training officers. And it was really interesting, like the commentary that you would get from them about gay, lesbian, transgender, like the entire community in general, because, we came back from a break and we thought things were going okay, but we weren't really sure. So we had a check-in. So we're going around the room and we said, hey, what would you do if a member of your family told you that they were gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, whatever? And there were some who said, oh, I'd be fine with it. Oh, I have a few people in my family. Others were like, my religion says that I would never speak to them again. Others would say, like, oh, socially, like, that's not okay. Like, they would be cut off from us forever. And we're moving around this room. There are about 40 people. And there's one person I'm looking at, and I'm so dreading his answer. He is this 6'5", very brusque-looking Afrikaner, and I'm just like, oh, this is going to be so bad. And we get to him, and he is super irritated, but not with us. He's super irritated with the other people in the room, and so he slaps the desk a couple of times hard enough for things to fall off onto the floor, and he says, we are members of the South African Police Service, and these people are citizens, and they are protected by the law, and if you don't want to do your job, then you should effing quit. Which completely changed the tone for many people in the room for the rest of the day. But so eventually what happened with that was, we, in addition to doing that training and having that training start to be disseminated, I had the opportunity to help them change their standard operating procedures in 4 of the 8 provinces before I left. So they literally changed all the rules around how you dealt with a transgender person when you encounter them. So
I think that training needs to be here in Vermont as well. I don't think the police officers know how to deal with people with disabilities, period. I've heard some really, really horrid stories that, like somebody had an accident and they came to their house and they just did not do it in a professional manner.
Well, somewhere around 40% of all people who were shot by policemen have mental health conditions. So that in and of itself, I mean, regardless of race, sex, orientation, that in and of itself is a huge problem. And I don't think, and I don't think that it's because they feel malice necessarily towards people who have mental health conditions. I don't think that at all. I think it's more that they don't know what to do. They're in a situation that is scary, and unfortunately, they're not trained to maim people. That's if you perceive a person as a threat, that is not what you're trained to do. So, and we need to do a better job with training for those people, so that they understand that, like, this is what a mental health crisis looks like, and here's how you don't make it worse. Because I think that, if I have social anxiety anyway, if I have any kind of anxiety, and then I'm put in a situation which is already going to be fraught with anxiety, and you point a gun at me, there is nothing that is going to make me worse than pointing a gun at me. And taking the gun away and coming and talking to me is a lot more effective than throwing me on the ground and putting in restraints, because who knows what my experience with restraints is. My experience with restraints may have been that I was harmed in a psychiatric facility by someone who did that, so I'm going to react accordingly.
Yeah, it makes sense. So the work that you've done in Vermont and the work that you've done in other states, do you find it very rewarding? And
I certainly do, or I wouldn't keep doing it. I try and meet people where they are. When I worked in Massachusetts, I was a placement specialist finding shared living providers for people who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I will tell you that the biggest thing about that, what was concerning, was you were placing people who were LGBTQ, but there was no assessment to let you know that those are those people. Because if you are as a provider expected to take me out to places where I have the chance to engage in social relationships that are edifying to me, if you don't know that I'm LGBT, you're not going to do that, or you're going to take me to the wrong places.
So what you're saying is to fit them into a proper setting, like I had the same kind of experience living in a home care providing situation where I'm gay and they put me with a woman that was straight, and I really felt that wasn't a good fit for me. So I went back to the case manager and I said, this isn't a good fit. I mean, she's straight, she has a kid, she has a boyfriend. It's not a good fit. And I don't feel good in her home. And the case manager at that time was doing some interviewing with some other families and then put me into a home with 2 gay men. And it was a lot better.
Yes.
And so I've got to say, and I hope people on the show that are watching me and talking to Chris, watching the both of us, that when you're in a home care providing situation and you do not feel comfortable, it could be your sexuality, it could be something that just isn't there, you need to speak up. And you need to go to your case manager and say, I'm not comfortable here.
Well, more so than that, before you ever accept being placed in a home, what I did was before I started, there was no assessment, so they would even know, like, hey, this person is is trans, this person is gay, lesbian, bisexual. There was no assessment for that, so I helped to create the assessment. But then, in every interview that I did with any family, I would not only I would ask questions about, like, okay, so how would you feel if the person who lived with you was gay or lesbian, trans? And okay, well, that's great, but how would you feel if they wanted to have someone spend the night? How would you feel about interacting with it? Like, how would you feel about, like, taking them to a club that you wouldn't necessarily go to yourself? And so it was very important, because they didn't have to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender themselves, but they did have to be willing to facilitate that person having access to meaningful relationships and supporting them in those relationships. And if they weren't, then I never placed them there. And that meant that, an interview for me was sometimes 5 hours for a family, 3 hours for an individual, so I could really know who you were and how you were going to react to lots of different things, but especially that. Because because it's not just that, but I would also have to dip into the religious belief. So you tell me that you're going to do this and you're going to be supportive of this person, but will you really, when according to your church specifically, this means this, this, and this? So it was a very pragmatic, practical, slow process where I let people get to know each other and find each other's foibles before they moved in, because I'd never wanted a situation like yours where you would be like, I'm not happy here and I can't do this.
No, and you know, I wasn't. I mean, I felt, you know, this just isn't a good fit. And I would always go into my room and just shut the door, and it was sad, you know, and I wasn't happy. And then I was in another home where the woman was vegan. And I'm sorry, but I'm not vegan, and I couldn't eat the foods that they were eating, and so I went to the case manager and said, find me something else.
I think the most important thing with all of it is, you know, whenever we're feeling isolation from for whatever reason, that we actually say something. But the bigger thing than that is knowing that you have the right to say something and having a sense of agency that, you know, you can do that. The two most important things for me when working with anyone are agency and self-efficacy. I need to understand. I need to own all of my decisions, whether they're good or bad. Mm-hmm. And I also need to know that I have the power to make decisions for myself. And I think that there's so many people who are disabled, whether they're LGBTQA or not, who don't understand that idea that I have a choice.
Right.
Right. The agency that I had, our whole thing is, when it comes to psychiatric care, you have a choice. You can take meds or not. You can be inpatient or not. You can but it's all about that individual's choice. Just like we choose, who we are is not a choice, but how we move through the world is. And so the most important thing, and I think in any relationship, in any person's sense of self, is the idea that they have the choice to move through a world in a way that makes them comfortable and happy. And when they feel like they're not being given those choices, that hopefully they will have the agency to say something and move into a place where they can.
So were there any good, I mean, when you had clients that went into homes, mm-hmm. and whether they were GLBTQIA, and were there some good endings to their stories?
There were many good endings. There were many, many good endings. And in fact, I should say that really, it was almost like sometimes that was secondary, because sometimes the provider would be the person who was GLBTQIA. And they would be given, you know, a person who wasn't, and and that would be a wonderful, loving relationship where they were able to support each other. And sometimes, and there have been a couple of times where, ironically, people have been like, oh, I can't live with someone else who is, because it just makes me uncomfortable. Uh-huh. So but there are more times than not, it was all about the relationship more than anything else. And that's why I think it's so important in any situation like that to build relationships before you just drop someone off at someone's house. So it's a slow process.
Did some of them take them to places like bars or?
Yeah, some of them take them to places like
social
bars.
Social places?
Yes, bars, gay cruises.
Oh, wow.
One couple hosted a Halloween party with all LGBTQI people.
That is cool.
But it's about the people. I mean, if you have people who truly have a love for other people, then they will do what's necessary, I think, to support them, no matter what it is, and whether. I mean, and here's the thing: being supportive of someone and who they are doesn't mean that you have to be who they are. It just has to mean you have to have the enough security in yourself to let them be who they need to be and you be who you need to be, and that not be a conflict.
Yeah, I can see that. What are you doing now for like outreaching with people with disabilities and?
Well, we go into psych units every week. Like we have people in the Brattleboro area here in the Northeast Kingdom, in the Rutland area, and who move in between those places, who go into psych units on a regular basis, looking for people, helping them to advocate for themselves, helping them to file grievances, helping them to find bridging services into the outside world. That is what we do. We also we went to we went to a conference in July, and so we had the opportunity to go and visit with the staffs of Patrick Leahy and Bernie Sanders to talk about some national legislation and things like Section 8 and requirements that, for example, you be in therapy in order to keep your housing. And we're like, that's not okay. Forcing someone into therapy who doesn't feel that they need it, like that removes their choice as coercive. And if that's it, and if you are doing that as a condition of their being in housing, then you, in some cases, are forcing people to be homeless. And that is not okay. Saying to a person who's been a victim of domestic violence that, you know, if you're going to live in this place, you shouldn't call the police if this person is still bothering you, is not okay. Disabilities come in many shapes and forms, some seen and some unseen. Trauma is one that often isn't obvious until the moment when something happens and that person's triggered. So so like in terms of the work that we do, it's not just it's not just going into hospitals, it's also helping to train people on how you deal with people who have trauma. It's also working with other peers and this thing called intentional peer support to teach them how to talk to each other, because it's not about one of us being right or one of us being wrong, or, you know, me always giving you advice and you always taking it, because continuing to try to save someone doesn't save them. You infantilize them. You have to give them the tools and give them the support to be able to, at some point, be able to try and advocate for themselves. And when they ask, then you help. But our job is not to tell people what they need, because that's exactly what the systems do to all of us. And that's why we are in the distress we're in.
Huh. Yeah. That's something. It's something else to talk about psychology problems that people with disabilities have, and case management is so important. And
when you actually get it, that's a bigger one. That's a bigger issue across the board. Do you actually get the case manager you're supposed to be getting? And does your case manager actually recognize how your disability affects your ability to do the things that they're asking? If I have social anxiety and you gave me 12 appointments and I don't have a car and I have to take public transportation, guess what? I'm probably not going to go. And then you're going to say I'm non-compliant, and then you're going to threaten my housing, and then I'm in a crisis and I end up in a psych unit.
That's a big thing right now, too, that a lot of agencies, the agency that I work for, CCS, we're talking about case management. The whole state of Vermont's changing how case management is run. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what they're going to do. I think they're going to have an outside person that is going to come in and do your case management, your ISP, mm-hmm. and do that kind of thing, while your other case manager is just going to be, from what I understand, there for just moral support, I guess. And well, so I don't know what's going to happen, but there's big talk. And
well, there's some really important things that do, in my opinion, need to happen for people with disabilities. And one of those things is access to services without walls. location shouldn't matter. I may be more anxious because I have to go to that particular building than I would be anywhere else. So, if I'm a kid and you can talk to me, like we can do it in a park and I can be in a tree and you can be in the ground. You can still talk to me and I feel comfortable and I'm able to be more honest and forthright with you. If I'm a person who is very phone-based, it might be easier for me, rather than having to sit and look at you because that makes me uncomfortable, for us to sit on opposite sides of the room and text back and forth. We're still having the conversation, but
Right.
having it in an office shouldn't matter. What should matter is that I'm disabled. This is the place where I feel most comfortable. This is the place where I will be the most honest, open, and feel the most connection with you. So we should do it here, not in the place where you order me to go.
Huh. You're right. So I really, really thank you for coming on to the show today. This is like a whole new interview thing with Vermont Pride, and you're the first one that I got really to get to know you and the fabulous work that you're doing in Vermont and other places that you worked. I think it's fabulous work.
Thank you.
And it needs to be recognized, what you do in the state of Vermont and in other places that you worked, because it's important work.
Thank you very much.
And I think we need more people like you to help people with disabilities and.
Well, I think I appreciate that, but what I really want to say is, no, we don't need more people like me. We just need for more people to just see other people as people.
Right.
And that should be the end of it.
So this is episode 14, and thank you for coming on to the show today and meeting Christopher Woods and me. And see you next episode.